So today we're going to be analyzing a worm, and it's actually a blast from the past, and that'll become evident as we start analyzing it. But if you all would like to follow along with this analysis, there should be a link below the video to our site at ringzerolabs.com, and you should be able to find a link for the malware that you can download to analyze for yourself, as well as a report that you can follow along with. But for now, what we're going to do is we're not really going to debug this, but we're going to look at it in IDA. And pulling it up in IDA, we're going to be able to statically analyze it. And I've already gone through the file and labeled almost everything that's really relevant, so I won't be going through all that. That should make this analysis a bit quicker. But all of the offsets and everything should still be the same if you're following along. That way you can see what it is and where it leads to and that kind of stuff. But we start out at WinMain, and shortly down the way here, not too far, what we see is a string for system, and it comes shortly after a call to get username A. And what it's actually doing is going to compare these two strings, and if they are equal, there's a comparison at 40276F. And what that is going to do is if the strings are equal, so if the username equals system, you're going to take the path to the right. If it does not equal system, it's going to take the path to the left. Now this is a little bit of an odd comparison, because if this is an initial infection vector, you wouldn't expect the call to get username A to equal anything close to system, because a normal user won't be running under a system account. For those that don't know, a system account on Windows machines is above, it's considered a higher privilege level than administrator accounts. Normally this is reserved only for system services and things like that, so normal users wouldn't be running as it. And that's why it's a little odd to be comparing a file that should be clicked by a user to see if they are running as system. So that's why that stands out a little bit. But obviously the users are going to be running as system, so we're going to take the path over here to the left. And down the ways a little bit, we see that it comes into a loop here at 4028C6, and that loop is going to start threads, and it starts about 50 of them. And those threads are going to be started in this offset here. This offset is the beginning of the worm functionality, and if we scroll down a little bit, we see that it starts to use get tick count and srand, and then it does it again, and more get tick counts, more rands, again doing more get tick counts and more rands, and it does about 4 iterations of this in total. And we can see why here at 402A0E. You can see this formatted string of %d, %d, etc., and there's 4 of those. What this srand and get tick count did up above is went ahead and got 4 octets of random numbers and then formatted them in a string. So essentially what that did is just create a random IP address. So if we go back and we look at this loop here, and we see that it's creating about 50 different threads, and they're all going to be generating random IP addresses, we can see that this is the beginning to a worm functionality. If all 50 of those threads generate random IPs, and they all generate different random IPs, then it's going to start contacting all those out on the internet and probing them for whatever the functionality is trying to do. And you can see where that will ramp up very quickly, especially with that many threads. But once we create all the threads, once we create the random IP address, we go ahead and try and connect to it. If we're unable to connect to it, we sleep, and then we repeat the loop to create another random IP address. If we are able to connect to it, what we'll do is follow the path down here, and it will start another thread, and the thread that it's going to start, the address is located here at 402B90, and this thread is going to go through and check the IP address that it just connected to. It's going to check port 445, and that's the SMB remote file sharing port on Windows. And if that port is open, what it will do is go ahead and try to connect excuse me, try and connect to that IP on remote IPC shares. And we can see that here, where we call into at 402CA5, this IPC user list. Again, I've renamed these functions, but this is the location it's at. And if we go in there, we can see where it's trying to connect to the remote IPC share. For those not familiar, if you go to your start menu and computer, right-click it, and go to Manage, you'll pull up this computer management window here. If you go to Shared Folders and then Shares, you can see all of the shares that are currently open on your machine, or at least not open, but yeah, some of them are open and some of them are default. And by default, these 3 shares are always going to be on every single Windows machine. Since XP, they've been locked down quite a bit, but they're still there. So as we see here, the IPC share is on my machine just like it's on everyone else's, as well as the admin and the C. So in this instance, it's trying to connect to the IPC share. If that share is open, then we continue down to the right-hand side here. Keep going until we reach 4023EB. And this again goes into the, I renamed it, uses pass list. And that ends up at 402030. And what we run into is a rather long, kind of like a case statement. But the first call that we come into leads us to 401E10. And that again is dealing with the IPC shares. And it's trying to connect to it, and if there is a valid connection, then what it will try to do is open it will call open SC Manager A with that remote path to that remote machine's IPC share as the destination. And what this is doing is it's trying to establish a authenticated connection with that remote machine on the IPC share. It does that by using an integrated username and password list. You can see that here. If you go to the strings portion of IDA, type in administrator, look for the cross references to that. You can see down here in the data section that there are 2 usernames. There's going to try administrator and db2 admin, and then closely below that there's a password list, and it starts with password and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, etc., etc. There's 30 or 40 of them, and these are just common passwords that's going to try to authenticate with on that IPC share. So if we go back to where we were, this OpenSC Manager A, this was going to try to connect to that machine on, or with. Down towards the right here, we can see that if there is a valid connection to the machine and all the authentication went correctly, the malware will go ahead and check in with its owner, and it does that by using Gmail. Now, there's some antiquated stuff in here. I don't believe it works anymore. I've tried to connect to it manually. But essentially what this function does is it looks up the SMTP servers for Google and then tries to connect to them over port 25. And once it connects to them, it will issue a hello command and then start using the old school method of generating an email and then try and send that email to a recipient. and like I said, the servers and everything that it tries to resolve don't really work anymore. Google has since gone to TLS and SSL based email ports and everything. So the traditional SMTP port of 25, which was not encrypted, has been pretty much deprecated. I did look this up online, and they do have legacy service that they offer for port 25 for like printers and fax machines and things like that that aren't able to use SSL. But it's a very limited service, and it's restricted to only being able to send to other Gmail accounts, so you can't send outside of Gmail. And I thought that the malware would maybe use that, but that domain that uses is different than all the ones that are listed in the malware here. So it looks like this this is one of the indicators that this is probably a pretty old piece of malware. But if it were able to connect to the service over SMTP and generate the email, this is essentially what it would look like. And we can see that here. Actually used FakeNet to get all the traffic for it. And if you open up a FakeNet session and just filter by SMTP, and then follow the TCP stream, you can see what it was trying to do. So it was issuing a hello to Google. It was setting up where the mail is going to come from, who's it going to, the subject of IP, and then unknown. The unknown portion was going to be the current operating system, but again, it didn't find my current operating system, and that's Windows 7, so that's a little weird. And that's usually indicative of this being, again, older piece of malware. But if we go back to IDA, so this is the check-in function. It would, if everything was successful, it would call back to its owner and say, hey, I have a victim here, here's their IP, here's their operating system. And then after it checks in with the owner, we're going to be at 401 F6B. What it's going to do is create a remote service on the remote machine with this name here, and the display name of Windows Genuine Logon Manager. But the command it's going to issue is essentially what it does is, I have a screenshot of it here. This command.exe with a command of netshare admin $. That's going to create a remote service on the machine that runs this command, and that command is going to actively open up the admin share, which is not shared by default. It's a default share, but it's not really turned on. So what this command does is turn it on. And then shortly after that, it starts the remote service. It sleeps for just a little bit and then deletes it. So now the remote admin share is open. And then what the malware is going to do is copy itself to that remote admin share. And that remote admin share defaults to C Windows. So when it copies it with the name of CSRSS, it's going to be in C Windows / CSRSS. And that is, again, an exact copy of itself. And then it will create another service on the remote machine, and that remote service is going to be targeted to itself, and then it's going to start it and delete the service. So if you remember back at the beginning of this analysis, this is basically the end. At the very beginning in WinMain, there's a comparison to whether you're running as system or not. Since the malware at the very end copies itself to a remote machine and launches itself as a service, that means now it is running under the local system account on the machine. So it is running as system after a successful infection. That's why there's a comparison at the very beginning of this file to see whether it's going to go down to the left and look for propagation, or whether it's going to go to the right and set up persistence. So to the right, it's really simple. This file create net share that I named here, essentially what it does is drops out a backdoor, and it names it LSASBC. Backdoor is pretty straightforward. It's I believe it's petite packed, and it's just a generic backdoor, something for the authors to connect into the machine on. And then the next call directly after that sets up persistence in various registry keys like the current version run, and sets up services to run every time that Windows boots, so that they have persistence in both in the registry and in services. And then it will go ahead and email the author again saying that, all right, now we have a successful infection with a backdoor. Here's the credentials that were used to get on the box. Here's their IP, and here's the IP that infected the box for us. And that's pretty much it. So this comparison here at the very beginning determines what the malware is going to do at first. And again, the left-hand side is the worm propagation, where it's going to reach out to hundreds of thousands of IPs and look for open port 445 on them and try and install itself. Now this method of installing and propagating through SMB using passwordless and things is pretty old. The most recent version that I could find of this particular malware, which has been active within the last few days on sandbox sites, was back in 2015, and it was known as the Brambul worm. I believe it was used to target South Korea. So it's a little weird that it's showing up in active sandboxes like within the past week of this analysis. Perhaps it was being uploaded from someone's archive, they didn't know what it was, or maybe someone's uploading it now, trying to modify it and kind of repurpose it for use today. Kind of hard to say, but it is a good example of a worm that's pretty straightforward, uses a lot of good techniques, and it's a good file to analyze, especially for people starting out in malware analysis, because it's not packed, it doesn't have a ton of obfuscation or anything like that, and the techniques that it uses are still very real to malware today. So if y'all have any questions on this analysis or any other analysis that we've done, go ahead and hit us up on ringzerolabs.com, and we'd be happy to answer any questions.